Hey folks, it's Emily. This video, we're taking a big picture view. We focus so much on our current time and place in human history, right? And that's for good reason. What we do today is creating our future, but it's also interesting to look at the past, see what we can bring forward from the past. I want to share with you today the story of another great convulsion, a time people just like ourselves dealt with a rapidly changing climate, with cultural and civil upheaval, war, plagues, all the bad stuff. I'm talking about the 4.2 Ka event. The Wikipedia page on this is solid. It's worth reading if you've never heard about this time in human history. This will give you a good jumping off point. We're looking back a long time here, like 4,000, 5,000 years. We have evidence that at this time there was a pretty serious climate shakeup. It's worth noting people have been impacted by climate change before. When people talk about natural variations in Earth's climate, the natural variations are pretty bad. This 4.2 Ka event, scientists think there was a serious breakdown in AMOC, ocean current pattern. There were intense floods, there were intense droughts, major temperature changes. All sounds very familiar, right? I'm not trying to draw exact parallels. The time we're entering now looks like it's going to be more intense than the 4.2 Ka event. Still, as a human facing intense climate change, I am interested in what humans have done in response to intense climate change before. Just like today, the 4.2 Ka event was global. It impacted human civilizations all around the world, from China to South America to the Mediterranean. And the Mediterranean is where we're going to focus our story today, because so many of us in the US, we have a lot of cultural threads connecting us to the Mediterranean. There are so many ways we are still living in the future people created at that time. When we look at the climate outlook around the Mediterranean, around that beautiful little sea, we have to feel both fear and compassion for what's coming there. But it's worth noting that times have been really bad there before. I mean, if you look 4,000 years ago, some of you might recognize that's Bible times, right? When we look at the book of Genesis, which came into the world around this time period, we see echoes of a historical reality that was not what you would call cozy, right? So when I had the opportunity to speak with experts at the University of Iowa last fall, I thought folks on this channel might think it was interesting to learn more about what we know about how people responded to climate change during this historical period of calamity. When browsing through faculty profiles, I came upon Professor Katina Lillios. She's an acclaimed scholar, an anthropologist. She's an expert in this time period. And you can imagine what artifacts we have from so long ago for anthropologists to study. Many of them are death artifacts. So I went to go and meet her, and like I kind of exploded into her office because I was really excited, and I asked her to tell me about death. How did people going through this huge world upheaval, this period of climate change where traditional lifeways failed and sea level rose and people were cut off from each other and everything was really nuts? How did they die? Did it change the way they handled death? And Professor Lillios, from her perspective, this weird upbeat person has shown up and immediately begun asking death questions, which you can imagine most people avoid death questions, or at least they take a while to warm up with them. So she's like, what's going on here? And are you crazy? You might imagine I do get that a lot. I mean, this is more of a mad scientist experience that you have here with me than like a traditional science experience. So I give her some backstory. I'm pretty comfortable talking about death. I'm a clergy wife. My husband is a rabbi, so death comes to my house a lot. Like all clergy, my husband cares for the dying and for the dead and for their families. And as a clergy spouse, I hear way more about this 4 or 5 thousand year ago time period than most people. There's like a lot of Bronze Age, Iron Age transition talk at my dinner table. And there's a lot of shop talk too when we hang out with other clergy families about how people today are mourning differently across faiths. We have a lot of friends who are clergy in various Christian denominations. In our society today, we're so isolated from death. People don't die at home anymore as a normal thing, right? Death is medicalized and commercialized. And just like small children and old people, death is another thing that we can push out of view. You don't have to see it or think about it. You don't have to remember how vulnerable we are or how we all need care as we move through our lives to the place where we're all going. In this time we're living in of great change, in this social context where death is indiscreet, where death is something weird to go in and just talk about directly with a person who studies death. It's weird to go ask questions about death to a person who's an expert in death in our culture right now. It may not surprise you in this context to hear that many clergy across faiths have told me that mourning rituals have changed greatly in our society in the last few years. Since COVID and since we're in this pressure chamber the Western world's become sense, people are not mourning the way they did before. More and more, there is no funeral, there is no wake. In the Jewish community, many people don't sit Shiva anymore. Many people across faiths are observing no traditional mourning. Across faiths and cultures, increasingly, the vibe of the mourners is that a memorial service might happen when we can do it. When we have the strength to handle it, we'll put together the memorial service, but everything seems so heavy and immediate, and there's so much paperwork, and people feel like they don't have time to mourn. What Professor Lillios taught me then, coming out of this context, I found it fascinating. When we look at the foundations of our civilization back towards this formational, like biblical cultural period that has had a profound influence on Western civilization, we also see an abandonment of death ritual, abandonment, threads of the tradition carrying through this time of chaos and then coalescing into new forms. Let me tell you more about this with Professor Lillios. I got to go back. She let me go bother her again in her lab. So you can see that she's this very like elegant and refined person.
These collective tombs, I mean, they were certainly laborious to construct. They're also kind of laborious to kind of reopen and to kind of rebuild. I mean, there's death is work. Burying a dead person is work. When you see these other tombs post 2200 or so, there's much less work involved in producing these kinds of spaces and vessels for the dead. So yeah, it's big.
That's really interesting. That's not a thing that we talked about in our first conversation, was like the volume of labor.
Yeah.
And that we're looking at a society that had more energy to give to mourning.
Yeah.
And that does kind of line up with the decrease in energy being spent around burial and mourning today.
Yeah.
We talked for a long time. We had this long, interesting, quiet conversation. And this is YouTube. So I feel like I can't give you like 40 minutes of footage here. We talked about this shift from monumental burial going back thousands of years to the more fragmented, individualized burials after the 4.2 KA event. Through this time, we saw patterns and images from the Neolithic burials be preserved in various forms. I'm going to put those on the screen now. Check them out. So these are the death artifacts that basically everyone got buried with back when everybody was laid to rest in these giant megalithic community structures. These ones here are reproductions. Professor Lillios has students in her lab learn how to make these things with the tools of the time period. That's cool, right? To be able to viscerally connecting your hands with that part of our human experience. But over the period of calamity, these symbols that were clearly important to people went from being accessible to everyone to being rare, encoded only in high value ceramics and gold ornaments. What this means for us today. Many of us who are climate aware, we wonder about what comes next.
Dealing with them anymore. We have to do our own thing. I mean,
there are so many futurists, though, who think about how will people interact with like the ruins of the city in some fictionalized future collapse, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that this is an interesting other imaginative space to think about another human population. This one actual, not fictional human population, who is living amidst the ruins of a society that has their act together to build bigger stuff than they're building right now.
Yeah, they certainly.
That's really cool to think about.
It's a short story to be written.
That would be a good
long
one.
story to be written for them.
Thank you for your time with this. This is so interesting, and it really, I think, is helpful for us to not feel alone. A lot of people out there, they feel very alone in their mourning at this time of change. It's, we've done it before. Got to see if we can do it again, right?
That's a good way of looking at it. Yeah, people have dealt with this before. I mean, it probably wasn't always easy. Some people, some communities probably did not survive. I mean, I'm not saying that it's all hunky dory.
No, I don't imagine it was nice.
But it took effort. And some people managed, and obviously they managed enough so that populations have continued since then. So,
and there's just so many interesting guideposts, even this far in the past. There's so much that is preserved even this far in the past. And thinking about people 200 or 300 years out, interacting with it, and then us thousands of years out interacting with it again, it's kind of cool to have another call and response with the megalithic dead, with the collective ancestors.
And speaking of that, just as wrap things up, I mean, there are people who, New Age, neo-paganists find meaning and comfort in these megaliths today in Iberia and other parts of Europe. So you see evidence at some of these sites and continued use and visitation of these places, these sacred spaces. These are sacred spaces, have sacred. You see these places continue to have meaning to this very day. For some people who have faith in these stones. So that's fascinating.
How will our culture change as the world goes through this turning? Will the memes we see online today end up being echoed through graffiti and textiles in some post-internet wasteland, eventually being compiled in some future book of Kells? It's weird to think about, right? And it's important as we live in this time of intense change. Intense change isn't coming in the future, it's happening now. It's important that we know now we're not alone. Humanity has lived through terrible times of change before, has lived through climate change before. This time around, it does appear we've supercharged the whole process, which is we're all becoming aware. It may have been a bad idea, but we aren't alone. Every one of us is descended from survivors. Today, we suffer, and many of us forget how to mourn, or we can't find any solace in what were once familiar and comforting rituals. But some ancestor, you may have never imagined them before, but they relate to your struggle. We are descended from people whose world fell apart and built a new culture with values and needs that still echo today. Our imagining, our ability to make sense of things, to build culture, to continue to find ways to live and ways to die is essential to our humanity. I focus on a lot of practical things on this channel, but why we get ready when we look to the future is to preserve those things, our humanity, our shared values, the ideas we bring with us as the rubber hits the road, they're going to matter. Think about what you want to carry with you. And thanks for listening in. I saved this video for when I needed some perspective, for when I needed some time to feel comforted in grief, to feel not alone. I thought, maybe you're there with me too. When we think about getting ready, it's not all about looking forwards. I hope you found it relevant to spend a little time with me looking backwards and reflecting on our resilient human heritage. Folks, thanks for being here with me. The support for American resiliency is just incredible. People have given so much to this project. It's the reason why I'm able to keep doing it. I want you to know this last month is the first month that we are off the runway. We are on target to being able to be with you, keeping an eye on the news, trying to get you the information you need indefinitely. Thank you so much for everyone here with me. Talk to you again soon.